We can talk now to the leader of the Green Party, Zack Polanski, who joins us now from Salford. Good to have you with us. Thank you very much for being with us. Donald Trump faced his third assassination threat on Saturday night. I just wondered if we could start off by getting your reaction to that.
Yeah, we need to condemn political violence. It's scary, the democratic space where people are increasingly angry and politicians are under threat. Now, it won't be a surprise to you know that I disagree with much of what Donald Trump says, but it is important that I think politicians from all parties and all perspectives all condemn political violence, because ultimately we need to make sure that everyone's safe to be able to disagree.
So I guess you're saying that no matter what the policy of someone, political violence can never be justified. Is that the argument?
That's right. I'm a Democrat, as in I believe in democratic politics. I don't believe in threatening people. I certainly don't believe in violence. And I think it's important that we condemn this, and that's the end of the story, really.
I'm keen to get a bit of a sense about what a Green government could look like and really look at some of your kind of policies in a bit more detail, because, look, if you look at the polls, it is a possibility that you could be involved in some kind of government in the future, right? You've got an announcement today about buses, and I am keen to talk about that, because I always think it is, the most used form of public transport, but you wouldn't necessarily know that given the amount of coverage it gets, right?
Right, and it costs us up to £23 billion to the economy for poor connectivity. When you speak to people, particularly in rural communities, sometimes you say you might get a bus every few hours, but actually it's every few days. And so it's really important people have access to an affordable bus that runs frequently, because they might want to visit a loved one, go to work, or run an errand. So it's vital that we invest in our buses. We also talked about free bus travel for under 22s. Now, if this sounds like a radical idea, I was in Glasgow just a couple of days ago, where it was a Scottish Green government in coalition with the SNP who brought in free bus travel for the under 22s, and we've seen what it does there. They're already talking about extending that to all people using buses. The main thing we're announcing, though, today is to bring buses into public control. So actually, when you get Green councils or Green councillors, they're there to make sure that the routes are efficient, that we're capping fares so that they're cheaper, and also that they're just frequent and effective.
You want to legalise drugs, so one of the key policies, I think, for the Green Party. And look, if you look at organised crime, you can see the arguments in favour of it. But I guess my question is about how it is controlled. Cannabis, for example, could we see a situation where, when you go to Amsterdam, you see cannabis shops kind of freely on a high street?
So we want to legalise and regulate drugs, and the bit why and regulate is really important is because the so-called war on drugs has clearly failed over and over again. In fact, we have the highest drug deaths in Europe, and for the past 14 years, every single year, drug deaths has increased. So the war on drugs isn't working, and so the question has to be, what do you do about it? Now, there will be some drugs, like cannabis, like in Amsterdam, where it might be that a cannabis cafe or a social club is appropriate. With harder or so-called more dangerous drugs, that clearly is not the plan here, and it's often been misrepresented by Labour. With a more dangerous drug, we want to make sure those are in the...
Just to be super clear, that you're not talking about being able to go and have a cocaine cafe, but a cannabis cafe on a high street could be a reality under the Green Party.
Well, it wouldn't necessarily be on a high street. There'd be a whole conversation there about planning and what the community wants. But with a harder drug, that's about making sure it's in the hands of a medical health professional. And if someone has a dangerous, addictive relationship to drugs, do we allow them to buy those drugs on an illegal market or down a street alley? Or actually, do we say a pharmacist?
On the cannabis, and I know how it would have to go through local planning, but in theory, you could buy cannabis on a high street, you could have a cannabis cafe on a high street.
If that's what a community agreed to, and obviously it's going to be different on different communities. And so that's not the number one thing we're pushing at this local election. I know you did say it was one of our kind of key pledges or manifestos, and I don't think that's true. Actually, the key thing is to end rip-off Britain, to end the toxic combination of low wages and high bills. But I do accept it is something that we will be talking about when we get to a general election, so it's legitimate to ask about it.
The other thing, because I just think that the drugs policy is something that I think is genuinely interesting, right? And so I'm just keen to go through a little bit more on this, if I may. Specifically about GHB, otherwise known as a date rape drug, right? On your website, because you want to legalise all drugs, the assumption is that drugs like Rohypnol, like GHB in particular, may be legalised. Rape Crisis website says that drugs that have been known for their use by people who commit spiking in order to rape or sexually assault someone includes Rohypnol or GHB. So under your plans, could GHB, the purchase of GHB, be legalised?
This would be unlikely to be a drug that we would want people to be buying or even to be legal other than if someone had some sort of addiction to it. I would point out, though, that people already spike drinks in alcohol, for instance. People already give people alcohol against their will, and these things are already illegal, and there's no way that's changing. You'd be very surprised, and I wouldn't come on your programme and say what we're legalising is the spiking of someone's drink. That's abhorrent, needs to stay illegal, and in fact I think we actually need to look at how do we make sure that we're preventing that and be taking that more seriously. I know stories just in my personal life, but I know everyone usually knows someone or a friend who's experienced how horrific a spiking is, and that clearly needs to be stopped. Again though, that's still going on right now, even when the drug is illegal. So what I would say is the current approach isn't working. We need to have a much more holistic approach where people feed into this, but most of all medical health professionals and people engaged in community safety to actually make sure that we have a reasonable evidence-based approach to how we look at drugs rather than what happens right now, which is just the Wild West.
I was intrigued that you've never drunk yourself. Does that mean you've never tried any alcohol?
I've never tried any alcohol at all. I think growing up, as you know, I'm a gay man. And when there wasn't kind of an LGBT community centre to go to, I grew up in Salford in Manchester, where I'm speaking to you from right now. And so the place I would often go when I was 15, 16 years old was Canal Street. That's an inappropriate place, I think, for young people to be at that age. I already felt like I was doing one naughty thing, I suppose, by being in pubs and clubs. So I was in there drinking tap water most of the time and having a dance and meeting people. So I grew up in the club scene, never drinking. And so then when I turned 18, I think I was just like, it's fine, I don't need to drink anymore. I want to say all of that, though, that, you know, I'm not being the fun police. If people want to have a drink, totally fine for them to have a drink. I've just never personally done it.
Yeah, like you say, it's, you know, you found other ways of having a good time. Do you agree with your Green MP, Hannah Gorton, by the way, that there's too much boozing in Parliament? Nigel Farage has come out to say that, you know, the Green Party want to legalise drugs but crack down on a lunchtime drink.
Hannah Spencer, although I like Hannah Gorton, if we're going to move the constituency. No, it's totally fine. I totally agree with Hannah. This isn't something that me and the MPs have particularly had a discussion about. I think it was an off-the-cuff remark where she said that people who are about to vote shouldn't drink alcohol first. And it's been pretty shocking to me to see Nigel Farage and, to be frank, Labour MPs say that people work 15-hour days, so they should be able to have a drink before they vote. I know lots of people who work 15-hour days, cleaners, teachers, people who are doing, you know, work in the real economy. The idea to them that they would have a drink when they go back to work, they'd be fired for that, and so they should. And so the idea that we have this toxic drinking culture in Westminster where people can go for a drink and then make decisions on 69 million people's lives, crucial decisions to their lives, and not be doing that sober. I think to many people that seems strange, so I'm really pleased that Hannah, I think accidentally, you know, she was just answering a question, but has brought this centre stage into the public conversation, because I think to lots of the public it will seem very strange that MPs are allowed to get drunk and then vote. That's outrageous.
Just finally, it's a big week, of course, for Keir Starmer, with the Mandelson saga continuing, of course. You've always said that there would be no kind of Green Labour agreement at an election if it's Keir Starmer running the Labour Party. What if it was, you know, Andy Burnham or Angela Rayner? Would that lead to a different answer to that question?
As you know, I always want to directly answer questions to you, Sophie. I am going to have to put a caveat there that say it's almost impossible to know, because until we know who that leader is, what their policy platform is, and how they behave as Prime Minister and how they treat the Green Party, and more importantly, the policies we care about, it's very difficult to judge. That being said, I do like to answer a question. It's no secret that Andy Burnham and Angela Rayner would be much closer to my politics than Keir Starmer are. I think they're people who do care about tackling the cost of living crisis and do care about people in this country. I still have reservations about their policies. They're still in the Labour Party, and my question would be, why have they been so quiet while the Labour Party and the Labour government have done some pretty egregious things, both in this country and around the world? But I do think it'd be a significant improvement to remove Starmer and make sure that the party was leaning more towards the left, more towards a progressive direction, and more towards ending rip-off Britain.
OK, Zack Polanski, good to speak to you. As always, thank you for being on the programme today.
Thanks so much.